When Paul reached the coastal city, he was surprised to find believers eager to receive his message. About 3 blocks from the main road, the streets were humming with news of a powerful exorcist visiting the area. Crowds began to form, and there were many who believed, and many more who listened out of curiosity. As he spoke to the people, he wondered to himself, "What is it they know of my master's teachings?" "Have you submitted to the spirit of authority?" Paul questioned. The disciples stood, stunned, until one of them, Mason, hesitantly replied, the master exorcist, "We didn't know there was such a thing." An uneasiness settled in the disciples as they questioned the depth of their ignorance, the growing concern contorting their faces. "Oh no, they're starting to worry," Paul thought as they glanced at one another. He patted their shoulders, reassuring them. He taught them how to gain power, about where to anchor their focus for spiritual strength, explaining all the steps that had yet to reach their ears. Mason was relieved that Paul didn't judge them. Instead, he taught them the words of his master. He felt his previous tension melt from his body as he listened, hanging on every word he believed and understood the truth of Paul's teachings. Soon, he felt flushed with heat, the sensations intensifying at his back between his shoulder blades. He opened his mouth and began to speak, only to shock himself with the words he was hearing. His tongue that lifted and curled felt light and independent. He looked up, as to not be distracted by the varying expressions of those glancing at him. Heiner, one of the many who were led by curiosity, felt a stirring in the pit of his stomach. Words he never heard before, words he couldn't understand, replacing the sound of Paul's voice. He looked on from the crowd, amazed and puzzled. He listened as Paul spoke boldly, hearing the same words, yet, "I need to learn from this master," he whispered beneath his breath. Right then, Heiner, who was just staring at Mason, saw nothing but legs in front of him. He looked around and caught a glimpse of a man who bumped into him. "You could at least say sorry," the man heard a voice calling after him. He just kept walking, a growing frustration sinking into the pits of his stomach. He made his way through the remaining stragglers of the crowd, down the street, through a few winding alleys, the fading of the sky threatening to cast aside all light. "Bardell, where have you been, man?" "That forsaken exorcist is here," he replied. "The one that's been stirring up trouble ever since his master was poorly dealt with." A loud thud interrupted Bardell. As he glanced over at the others, he thought to himself, "All right, sore subject. Well, he's in town now, just off the main street. I saw him droning on and on. He's teaching what the Ancient of Days taught him, spiritual knowledge that stems back from the beginning of time." The pit in Bardell's stomach began begging for attention. He continued, his strong voice hinting at a bit of shakiness. There was immediate influx of spiritual power. Enlightened by the exorcist's actions, at least 12 of them began speaking in the encoded language. And that's just the first day. Who knows how long he'll stay, how many he'll corrupt with his message. Of course, as with any conversation about the unseen, there were many who stubbornly rejected his message. Just as the exorcist garnered fans, he garnered opposition as well. Though not much could be done to sway the crowds against him, they only grew larger. Paul traveled around the city, often teaching others what his master taught him, and his master's master taught him. He knew they had seen his power, for word had traveled that even a piece of cloth that merely touched his skin became endowed with the power to cast out demons and even heal the sick. Women of the town would gather around, bringing with them all sorts of scrap cloth, a handkerchief in one hand, and a tattered apron in another. looking to merely graze him with it. He noted to himself, if only they would believe the way, they would have no need for such things. Heiner quickly tucked his handkerchief into his pouch. It might seem silly, he thought, but who knows how long his new master would stay in town for? It had already been a couple months. What if I never experience an increase of power like the others? The doubtful thought rattled through his mind. At the time, there was a traveling band of priests. The 7 sons of Skiva passed by. Curian, the youngest of the bunch, gazed at a young man who seemed to be lost in thought. The men grew weary of the master exorcist's fame. They scoffed at the mirandering women in their scraps of cloth. They talked amongst themselves, griping, "He's not that special. I'm sure we could cast out demons just the same." And there they go again. They're so envious of that master exorcist. Saul, was it? A gust of wind caused Curian to look up. The night sky was brewing a storm that rivaled the mood of the priest. They entered the quaint tavern seeking sustenance and shelter, though as the meal vanished, pieces of a plan started taking its place. Curian could barely keep his food down as he listened. You see, commercial cities like these house many people dealing with their demons, one chimed in. Let's find a poor soul in need. Head priest, I heard a rumor. These fools are convinced they can perform an exorcism. The thought caused the lump where Curian once freely swallowed his meal. His mind was screaming at him to say something, put an end to the conversation, an end to the plan. His body tensed. The scene before him faded away. A large thunderclap snaps him back. See, I told you it would be close. It's that lower room there. A man starts for the door, thinking it had been blown open by strong winds, only to stop in his tracks as men in robes file into the room. We don't usually get your kind here. His soft voice barely audible over the creaks and bends of old wood. These men shouldn't be here. A thought invades the man's head. Bardell! No! The man barely whispers as his head jerks to the right. They shouldn't be here. The thought rings again. No, you have to go, the man cries. You're angering him. You shouldn't be here. The noise hits the sound waves like a screech. Curian is panting as he watches Bardell tumble over a chair, one of the few pieces of furniture present in the room. It's as they said. Sometimes he's calm as a button, and other times he's crazed and screeching, says the man who led the way. The shouts and mutters end. The man who is seemingly arguing with himself elongates his hunched back. Standing tall, he turns to the priest. Curian catches an obsidian glimmer in his eye. He stumbles back as he peers into them. We have to get out of here. The thought weighs on his tongue, too heavy to turn into words. The lead priest steps out among the religious men. He tried using the words of the exorcist in his incantation, saying, I command you in the name of Jesus, who Paul teaches, come out! Bardell snickers. Sensing the growing fear in the room, he surveys the priests as they fail to mask their panicked faces with bravery. Finding relief, he thinks, they are no disciples of his. The evil spirit replied, Jesus, I know. Paul, I know. But who are you? The problem faced by the 7 sons of Skiva. They simply had no authority, no power over the demon they foolishly confronted. Curian wanted to make a break for the door like a few of the others. Move! Move! The command traveled from his mind to his legs, but nothing. "Pray!" Kyrian screamed to the head priest. "Pray," the demon Bardell, disturbed by the disrespectful display, says. He leaped on the one closest to the door, grabbing him by the back of his robes. He flung him to the other side of the room. A loud thud followed the first as another priest was sidekicked into the wall. A low, long creak, followed by a thud. The door slammed shut, triggering a wide grin on Bardell's face. "What of your incantations?" Bardell jeered as he punched his head priest. "Oh, I see why you're the head. You're more fun to hit than the others." The candles that brightened the room before laid beneath a man whose arm received a second elbow. In the dark lower room, Kyrian thought to himself, "This is it. He overpowered us all. Jesus." He choked out. A door flung open once more. A young man, drenched from the downpour, stands in the opening. Bardell lurches for the door. "Throw it!" Heiner thinks quickly as he absorbs the scene in quick bursts of lightning. Immediately gaining control of his movements, Bardell leaps to the back wall. "Run!" The 7 sons of Skiva picked up and fled from the house, some barely conscious, but all naked and battered. Kyrian collapsed into the hands of the crowd that gathered, drawn in by the screeching and screams, the shrill sounds mixing with the thunderclaps. Blood washed off the men in the rain. Kyrian thinks to himself, Get out of there! You'll be killed!" as his consciousness slips away. Back in the room, an unfurled handkerchief lays gently on the floor between Bardell and Heiner. Bardell's face twitched in disgust. "That foul thing." Wearily walking around it to his new target, Heiner could tell Bardell was cautious of the tiny cloth on the floor as he read the disgust on his face. "I need to get it back." Just as the thought flashed in his mind, he heard a crash. A broken piece of a table landed over the handkerchief. Now what? Heiner had drawn further from the door in an attempt to snag it. There's only one reason why this demon would be so afraid of a scrap of cloth. A water-soaked Heiner thought to himself. As Bardell ran to attack him, Heiner opened his mouth and the words fell out. "Come out, in Jesus' name!" The spirit shrieked, "You're one of his!" Then he fell to the ground and convulsed violently before leaving the body of a man behind. The story of what happened spread quickly throughout the city. While the egos of the priests never recovered, everyone else who had gone through the terrifying night did. A solemn fear descended on the city, many burning their occultic incantation scrolls and idol dolls. They traded in their old protective charms for Paul's teaching of the way, the truth, and the light.